about storms. Anybody ever in a storm? All of us? Yeah. Storms. Did I tell you about the Minnesota couple who decided to vacation in Florida? This is sort of a storm story. It's hard to say, storm story. They planned to stay at the very same hotel where they had spent their honeymoon 30 years earlier. But because of hectic schedules, it was difficult to coordinate their travel schedules. So the husband left Minnesota and flew to Florida on Thursday, while his wife was going to fly to Florida the next day. The husband completed his flight and he checked into the hotel in Florida. And as he checked in, he noticed a computer in the lobby. So he decided to send an email to his wife. However, he accidentally left out one letter in her email address, and without realizing his error, he sent the email to someone else. Ladies, that doesn't surprise you that the husband got the email address wrong, right? Well, meanwhile, somewhere in Houston, a widow had just returned home from her husband's funeral. He was a minister for many years, was called home to glory following a sudden heart attack. The widow decided to check her email, expecting to see messages of condolence from relatives and friends. After reading the first message, she fainted flat on the floor. The widow's son rushed into the room and he found his mother on the floor and saw the computer screen which read, "To my loving wife. Subject, I've arrived." Here's the text. "I know you're surprised to hear from me. They have computers here now, and you're allowed to send emails to your loved ones. I've just arrived and have been checked in. I've seen that everything has been prepared for your arrival tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you then. Hope your journey is not as hectic as mine was. P.S. hoisted it, no cement secured it. The I-beam stood independent of human help. They were standing alone, but not alone. Several days later, engineers realized the beams of the large cross came from a different building. It came from the other building that collapsed. A symbol in the wreckage. A cross, well, that was found in the center of crisis. Maybe you say random? Well, maybe. When the towers collapsed, I'm sure many asked, where is God in all of this? The discovery of a cross kind of dares us to hope. An answer right in the middle of it all. I wonder if that can be said about our tragedies. When the ambulance takes our child, or disease takes our friend, or when the economy takes our retirement, or a two-timer takes our heart. Can we, like Frank Salecchia, find Christ in the crisis? I think by now the presence of troubles in everyone's life doesn't surprise us. But I think the absence of God, that's the part that undoes us. We can deal with an ambulance if God is still in it. We can stomach the ICU if God is there. We can face the empty house if God is in it. Minus some crazy email from some guy from Minnesota. Right? The question is he? Is he in our storms? Folks, today I think the Apostle Matthew, I think he would like to answer that question for us. See, he was in a storm. Little background, Jesus was teaching in a solitary place. He was teaching by the Sea of Galilee. He had compassion on the people there, so he fed 5,000 with 5 loaves and a couple fish. Then he directed his disciples. He told them to do this. I want you guys to leave and go to the other side of the lake. Let me read from you Matthew chapter 14 and verses 22 to 33. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." And Peter speaks up, Peter being Peter. "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. And Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You have little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they had climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." Can you imagine the disciples in the boat? Waves splashing all around them. This wasn't a building collapsing, but it had to feel like the sky was falling. It was sort of like, can you imagine some big sumo wrestler jumping into a kiddie pool? That's what the Sea of Galilee was probably like. The northern valley acted like a wind tunnel, and it compressed everything, and it focused the squalls right onto the lake. Waves of 10 foot tall were common. Remember the account we read? The account we read said it begins at nightfall. Jesus is on the mountain in prayer, and the disciples are in the boat. They're in fear. They're far away from land, and they're fighting heavy waves. And when does Jesus come to them? 3 o'clock in the morning. So if evening began at 6 o'clock, and Jesus came at 3 in the morning, the disciples were alone in the storm for 9 hours. Got to be 9 pretty scary hours. Anybody ever have 9 pretty scary hours? Yeah. Probably long enough for more than one of the disciples to ask, "Where's Jesus?" He knows we're in the boat. He told us to go in the boat. For heaven's sakes, it was his idea. Is God anywhere near? And from within the storm comes an unmistakable voice. "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." I imagine Jesus' wet robe, soaked hair, waves splashing all over. And he speaks to them at once. Now check this out, because this is pretty cool. I've seen the words of Jesus here translated many ways. The words I read to you are from the New International Translation. Other translations say, "It's all right, I'm here." Or, "Courage, it's me." But do you really want to know what the real translation of the words are? The real translation is, "Courage, I am. Don't be afraid." Courage, I am. Don't be afraid. The words sound kind of odd, don't they? The words "I am" kind of sound shortened, or somewhat like it should say, "I am here," or "it is I," or "I am going to do this," or that feels a lot more comfortable. But the literal translation of what Jesus shouted in the storm was simply, "I am." Anybody remember in Scripture hearing those words before? Rick, to me, they're sort of like the clash of the cymbal in the overture of 1812. Because we've heard them before. speaking from a burning bush. God said that to Moses. Remember Exodus 3:14? God announced, this is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. I am has sent me to you. And daring his enemies to prove him otherwise, Jesus declared in John 8:58, very truly I tell you, Jesus answered, before Abraham was born, I am. And determined to say it often enough and loud enough to get our attention, Jesus repeated the claim over and over. These scriptures aren't on the screen, but listen to this. In John 6:48, he said, I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world, John 8:12. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved, John 10:9. I am the good shepherd, John 10:11. I am God's son, John 10:36. I am the resurrection and the life, John 11:25. And John 15:1, I am the true vine. You may not notice through Scripture, but Jesus always uses the present tense to describe himself. He never says, I was. We sometimes do. And we do because we were. We were younger and we were faster and we were prettier and we're prone to be people who use the past tense because we reminisce. Anybody remember when we were? Yeah. Some of the we were's of me happened so far back I can't even remember them right anymore. That's how fish stories happen. That baseball game that I got 4 hits, I think I got 10 in it now when I tell the story. Because we were much better then. But not God. Unwavering in strength, he never says I was. There's no rear view mirrors in heaven. Our I am God never says someday I'll be. Again, we kind of do that because we're dream fueled and we look to future horizons, and there's nothing wrong with that. Someday I'm going to win the Masters. Someday I'm going to be CEO of this company. Michael, you may say someday I'll be first chair. And that's incredible for us to dream that way and think that way. But God never says that. God can't be more God than he is already. God doesn't change. He is the I am God. Hebrews 13:8 says this. It says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Can we remember the I am God when we're stuck in a storm? See, from the center of this storm, an unwavering Jesus says, I am. Tall in the wreckage of the trade tower, bold against the Galilean waves, in an intensive care unit, in a battlefield, in a boardroom, in a prison cell, in a maternity ward, whatever your storm, Jesus shouts, I am. You know, the construction of this passage echoes that point. The narrative here is made up of 2 acts, each 6 verses long. The first, verses 22 to 27, center on the power walk of Jesus. The second, verses 28 to 33, center on the faith walk of the Apostle Peter. In the first act, Jesus comes astride the waves and he declares the words engraved on every single wise heart. Courage, I am. Don't be afraid. In the second act, a desperate disciple, well, he takes a step of faith, and for a moment he does what Jesus does. He walks on water. But then he takes his eyes away from Jesus and he does what we do. He starts to fall. 2 acts, each 6 verses. And check this out. Each set of 6 verses contain 90 Greek words. And right in between the 2 acts, between the 2 set of verses, in the middle of those 180 words, is a 2-word declaration. Jesus says, I am. Matthew, the tax collector, the guy who's good with numbers, writes this story, and he reinforces the point. It comes kind of layered, sort of like a sub sandwich. Graphically, Jesus is soaked, but he's strong. And linguistically, Jesus is the I am God. But mathematically, whether in the words here in this passage or in a beaten down world, our I am God is in the middle of it all. Right in the middle. You see, folks, God gets into things. He got into the Red Sea one day. He gets into big fish, lions' dens, furnaces, bankrupt businesses, jail cells. He gets into the wilderness of Judea. He gets into weddings that they don't have enough wine. You should see the stuff he did at funerals. He even gets into a Galilean storm. Matthew can tell you all about it. And he gets into Schuylkill County storms as well. My friends, if you look, you'll find what everyone from Moses to Martha has discovered. And it's God right in the middle of our storms. I read this story and I figured I would share it with you. Young mother had missed her stop on the subway. By the time she realized her mistake, she didn't know what to do. She was in the worst part of town. She prayed for safety and some sign of God's presence. This was no hour for a young, frail-built woman to be walking through this rough neighborhood alone. At that very moment, the doors opened and a homeless, disheveled man came on board and popped himself down right next to her. Now she's really intimidated. She prayed harder. God, are you anywhere close? Are you here? God? The answer came in a song. The homeless man pulled out a harmonica and he played Be Thou My Vision. That happened to be her mother's favorite church hymn. He also said, young lady, I'll walk with you if you need me to. The song was enough to convince her. She could do this. She could get home. See, Jesus was there in the midst of it all. Frank Selecchia saw him in rubble. The Apostle Matthew saw him in the waves. Peter did too. And you, if you think you're alone, look closer. Call his name. He's there. Right in the middle of it all. Right in the middle of it all, Jesus says, I am. Let's pray.